Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a retro review of the 1993 Ultraman miniseries. This was the first time Ultraman was in an American comic, and this was done by Harvey Comics back in 1993. And this was written by Dwayne McDuffie with pencils by Ernie Colan and inks by Alfredo Alcala. So, all-star team of creative types doing this comic, and it is based on Ultraman Towards the Future. And so I am going to give you kind of a twofer review here. I'm going to give you my thoughts on that TV series because I finally was able to watch it. And I'm also going to tell you about this comic as well. The TV series is not needed to enjoy this comic book. When I originally read it when I was a teenager, I had never seen the TV series, and I enjoyed the heck out of this. But for full context, I think it's really cool to know about the TV series, and having finally watched it, I feel kind of full circle, now, actually having known the source material that this was directly based on. So let's start with the covers by Ken Stacy. And Ken Stacy was a prolific artist who did interiors and covers. And honestly, I think this is his best work because this is some of the best covers I've ever seen on a comic book. And I don't want to knock Alex Ross's cover for the Marvel comic because, I love Alex Ross. Well, what Marvel had him do was basically a teaser image that didn't have anything to do with the interior. And it basically just kind of intrigued the reader about what Ultraman was. This is Ultraman. If I had someone ask me, what is Ultraman? I could hand them these covers. And it's just 3 issues. It's just 3 covers. And they would know everything they need to know. This is Ultraman defending a human from a giant monster. This is Ultraman holding the injured man he's about to merge with, showing both his power and his compassion. And this, friends, is Ultraman fighting a whole bunch of monsters at one time. Just beautifully done, perfectly capture, everything about Ultraman. Now, one thing you might say is but when I looked at the Alex Ross cover, Ultraman's suit or skin or whatever it is, looked different. Didn't even screw up. No, actually. So the reason why Ultraman's skin or armor or costume, I'm not sure what it is, looks that way in the Alex Ross painting and normally in the show is because normally Ultraman is in a rubber suit. It gives him this very distinctive alien look. This was the first Ultraman series produced outside of Japan, Ultraman Towards the Future. It was produced in Australia, made by Australians, and they decided to actually put him in spandex instead because they were afraid that the actor couldn't move in the rubber or he'd get overheated in the rubber. I don't think that was the greatest idea in the world to switch it out for spandex, but it still worked out okay. I think it looks okay. It's not as distinctive as Ultraman's look normally is, but that's why he looks a little bit different in these paintings. I think, Ken Stacy just nails it. And also worth noting that there were a couple different versions of the miniseries. So they had just a traditional cover, but they also had a polybag version that came in a polybag. And if you took it out, it had the virgin cover on it, which was gorgeous. I don't have this version of the first issue. I may rectify that. And as an added bonus, it also came with trading cards, and each issue had 3 trading cards that you could get. I mean, basically you would need to buy 3 copies of it. And back in the day, that wasn't that hard. Your comic shop would order a stack of them, and you just look through to find the different cards that you wanted to buy with that issue. It was a 90s thing, so I think it's still cool. I really like the idea of the virgin covers because these are just so beautiful. And again, some of my favorite covers ever done. So let me recap Ultraman's origin in this series that's given in the TV show using this, wonderful Ernie Cohen art from the comic. So Ernie Cohen, isn't the most detailed artist, but I think he just nails the storytelling and nails the look of these characters so well. So this monster he's fighting is Gudis. So Gudis is this monster he fights on Mars. And so these astronauts from an organization called Yuma get underfoot. And so Jack, which is our main character, Jack Shindo, gets pinned under rocks. And he forces the other astronaut to flee. He says in the show that they're running out of time. And so as an act of nobility, Jack is willing to die so this other astronaut can live. And so the other astronaut runs to the ship. Unfortunately, Gudis spots the spaceship and destroys it. And then Ultraman destroys Gudis. But instead of just dying, Gudis' remains fly off of Mars and onto Earth. And there they become kind of a virus that infects different types of animals and things and turns them into monsters. And so Gudis is kind of this master villain that kind of infects and controls all these different monsters and eventually becomes this extinction level event. And I just always really like that plot. I really like that idea. In order to save Jack Shindu, Ultraman merges with him. And so Jack Shindu is returned to Earth. And when there is trouble, he becomes Ultraman. And so this miniseries has this wonderful double-page splash kind of summing up that, Ultraman fought the Gudis-infected monsters. And then after he defeated Gudis, which was in episode 5 of the TV series, he had other adventures. And basically it takes place 3 years after that. This is basically just kind of the recap of the origin, and this continues the story. Now, where Dwayne McDuffie changes the origin a little bit, but Dwayne McDuffie basically takes an origin that was interesting and then polishes it and makes it more coherent, make it make sense, and and just really iconic. I mean, it really stuck with me for 20-some years. So what he did was, that scene where they're like, oh, we're running out of time, but they don't say why, which never made sense in the first episode. He puts in a line about that they're running out of oxygen. So, okay, that makes sense. Jack was dying. Okay, got it. And then he has Jack actively help Ultraman during the battle with Gudis while still being trapped. I mean, it really just shows, really emphasizes Jack's heroism and Ultraman's compassion. And, you really just come out, really admiring both characters out of that scene. And you really, you kind of get their essence and you really care about, what's going to happen to them. And before I tell you the plot of the miniseries, let me talk about how Ultraman defeated the monsters in Ultraman Towards the Future. It was a little curious. So instead of traditionally dying, there was no explosion, there was no mutilation or any particular death blow that we saw. Instead, Ultraman would shoot them with energy and then they would disappear. And on just taking that at face value, we assume Ultraman disintegrates the monster. However, there's a couple of weird things in some of the episodes. So in one episode, Gudis infects this dinosaur that's been frozen in suspended animation and mutates him and awakens him. At some point in the episode, Jack suddenly starts talking about how this monster is not under Gudis's influence and that they should study him and learn, how he's resisting, and really made the monster sound like an innocent. However, at the end, Ultraman fights him and shoots him with the energy and seems to disintegrate him like the other monsters, which I thought was very strange. And then the ending of the series has Ultraman flying away, carrying the monster he just fought, and we don't know exactly where he's going. So, according to Dwayne McDuffie's Ultraman miniseries, so Gudis returns, and Jack gets injured. Ultraman's got to come down, merges with Jack again, and Gudis has flown to the moon. Why did Gudis go to the moon? Well, there's a moon colony there, actually a city on the moon now, but that's not what Gudis wants. No! Gudis is on the moon because Ultraman built a prison for monsters on the damn moon where he'd been sending the monsters he fought in the TV show. And so Gudis frees all the monsters, infects them, and controls them, sends them against Ultraman, who fights them on the freaking moon. It is amazing. It is Ultraman going through this gauntlet of monsters from the show. It is amazing. And the thing about Ultraman is he can only maintain his form for a short amount of time. And he'll have a beeper go off when he's running out of time. And if the beeper went off, he completely ran out of time, he would revert back to his human form, which, would be unthinkable. And that happens in this miniseries. It is awesome. This is 100% proof Ultraman. This is amazing. Now, I can understand some people who might have some issues here and there. It is not a perfect miniseries because nothing in life is. There are mistakes made. Jack Shindu says that it's been 3 years since he's been Ultraman. Ultraman says it's been 5 years since he's been on Earth. There are instances where it gets confused about which monster Ultraman has killed. And so there's like monsters that it forgets he hasn't killed, and then a monster he seems to disintegrate twice who keeps surviving. But the thing is, I actually don't care. I'm having such a good time that these are very minor points that, is easy to just ignore if you're enjoying the story. Storytelling is a lot like a Roadrunner cartoon where, Wile E. Coyote will run off the cliff and he can keep running on air as long as he doesn't look down. The second he looks down, gravity takes over and he starts falling down the canyon. Storytelling is like that. If you're having a good time, if you're engaged, if you're getting something out of it, it's easy to ignore, the mistakes or the artistic license that the writer will take. If you're not enjoying yourself, then obviously you will see every mistake, every silly thing in there, and your enjoyment will fall straight down that canyon. But this, to me, is a terrific, terrific story. Other criticisms I could see is that it is very overly simple, and it really, kind of ignores the supporting cast in the show. It doesn't show them at all. As far as I can tell, Jack is probably transferred to another Yuma station with different people there than what we saw in the show. So if you're looking for that cast, they're not there. But again, it's been several years later, and their iconic red ships are now gray. But again, it's been several years. They may have changed their mind, or maybe this particular branch of Yuma just colors their ships differently. But I could certainly see someone being like, well, that doesn't really capture the series because the series was, had these more complex plots and they were about the environment and, and all this stuff. And I understand that. I can understand that. But what I view it as is that the TV series was like cake. It was like, it had all these layers and all these ingredients put into it. And this is some really good ice cream that complements it perfectly. I think they both, this very simple primal version of Ultraman that McDuffie has written in this miniseries can exist alongside, what we got in the TV series. And the first issue even includes this nice little article that tells you actually who Ultraman is, some history, and that at the time they were actually shooting the next series in Los Angeles, which ironically the next series was never actually released in the United States, but it was shot here. And I think that's a really nice touch. And I don't think that's just a nice touch to have done in the 90s. I wish people would do that now with comics. Because there's so many comics that you pick up nowadays and they expect you to have read everything there was about it online. And most people haven't. You just can't depend on that. I mean, a great example is there was an Ultraman movie trailer. I think it was a couple years ago now. I don't know if they ever made the movie, but it looked fantastic. But the bizarre thing was, if you looked at the comments, most people said it was a rip-off of Pacific Rim. Ultraman dates back to 1966. Yes, these people could have done a quick 5-second Google search to figure out what Ultraman was. They didn't. You can't depend on that. What you can depend on is if they have the comic, you can communicate to them with this comic. You can tell them what this is. Picking up the Marvel first issue, you would have no idea what the hell Ultraman was. This, perfectly explains it. You know what Ultraman is very thoroughly. And so while I'm at it, let's talk about the TV series Ultraman Towards the Future. So it is made in Australia. And so when you hear the English voices, that is the actual actors. So that's kind of cool. It's unique. It captures, kind of the time and the time in Australia, just like any piece of storytelling will do. It is a product of its time. And it's very interesting, back when, the world was, struggling with the ozone layer, back when Australia, still had guns everywhere. They hadn't changed their gun laws. And those are, definite factors. And there's, even some very distinctly Australian episodes, set in the outback and things like that, and there's a survivalist cult that definitely rings some bells, for those of us who were in the 90s. And the writing is quite good, especially for a 90s TV series, because a lot of syndicated 90s TV series just were horribly written. Even the ones that aired in the weekend afternoons for adults, just terrible. This is actually very well written dialogue between the characters as far as, kind of the quirky, snarky things that they say back and forth. Is just really wonderful and a joy to watch. The accents do get a little thick, and sometimes the reverb on like the monsters or something might be a little harder to understand for my poor American ears, but it is quite good. I love Arthur Grant, who is the leader of Yuma. He's really cool, but very badass character. And I actually enjoyed all of the Yuma, which is basically Science Patrol. This perfectly captures the essence of what the Science Patrol was in the original show. It just shows a Australian branch of it, which is really cool because, you always saw the Japanese branch of whatever organization it was. So it's just cool to see this diverse cast in, a different culture in a different country, doing the same stuff. There is some curious weakness in the writing as far as telling the plot to the reader, what's going on with the monsters and the science fiction elements. It has a hard time doing that sometimes, and I've already given a couple examples of things that, were said that weren't explained or didn't make sense in the context of what they did. Usually, it's not anything too distracting or anything that ruins the episode. It does take you out of the experience a little bit, but and it's really kind of curious considering how well they do the banter, that they would fall down on the more basic, just plot explanation sort of writing. It is a 90s TV series, so the special effects are definitely a mixed bag. Some of them are quite good, some of them are not. But I will say, like every Ultra series I've seen, and I haven't seen a whole lot, but they are impressive. The models, the miniatures, the sets are just really cool. And the really cool thing I've seen in all the ones that I've seen, at least, they're not afraid to blow stuff up. And that's the great thing about Ultraman, is just seeing, all these cities and buildings and vehicles and stuff get blown up. I mean, it's really great, and yeah, they do definitely do that in this series. The monster designs, some, and execution on the costumes for the monsters, some are better than others. I did quite like Gudis. I felt both his original and his ultimate form were quite good and quite well executed. Again, I just love the concept of this overarching master villain for Ultraman anyway. And towards the end, I thought the last two monsters were well designed. The one that came from the sea, who resembles, to me at least, he resembles Gamera. The costume wasn't quite there for him. You could see the materials bunching up and stuff. But that's pretty common in old monster movies. If you go back and watch a Godzilla movie, you'll see the costume flapping around like it's, you can really tell it's a suit. But the monster that came from the sky, I did think he was pretty well executed, and he was really cool looking, and he had those like guns for hands, very Toho influenced monsters, and that's kind of the point of Ultraman. Ultraman was actually created by the co-creator of Godzilla to kind of bring those Toho movie experiences to the small screen. And some of the episodes are better than others. My favorites were episodes 4 and 5, which were essentially act as a two-parter to conclude the Gudis plot line. I was a little surprised they wrapped it up in only 5 episodes. I would have thought it would have been a great way to kind of connect all the monsters for the season, but it did free them up to do some more unusual stuff that would have had nothing to do with Gudis. And my favorite episode is actually one of them, and I believe it's called Tourist from Outer Space or something to that effect. And it is wonderful. It's what happens when a couple monsters come to Earth, and they're not bad, but they still cause some trouble. It is so weird and so offbeat. It is wonderful. If you don't see any episode of that series, I highly recommend that one. And I'll say it's not a perfect series by any means, but it's interesting. I think it's certainly worth watching. It's very interesting to see Ultraman someplace other than Japan. And it's only 13 episodes, so, it's not going to take up too much of your time one way or the other. You can find it if you look for it. I'm not going to link to it because it appears to be a series that you can't buy or watch legally right now. I suspect it's because it was co-produced by a couple different companies, and I suspect the rights for those particular episodes got tied up by that. That often happens. So it may just be a series that never gets an official release, a full official release. Or, there's some VHS tapes or something, but nothing of the whole series has been released that I could find. And I think that's tragic. But it is available to watch online. But again, I don't want to link to it because, even if it's not available to watch as a series, Ultraman still is certainly owned by a company that could, enforce copyright law on that. I hope they wouldn't, because I think this kind of keeps it alive and helps promote their other shows. But you can find that. And if you also search, you can find behind the scenes video. It's a two-parter, and it's got some Japanese narration, but just a little bit of Japanese narration, and you don't need it. It'll show you what they're doing in the creature shop and how they shot the monster scenes, and it's really wonderful to look at. And I also found a couple clips from newscasts in Australia about the show, and those were kind of cool too. So they said it cost, I think, about $4 million to make, and so that's pretty cool. And before I go, I want to talk about the people who put out this comic book, so you understand the caliber of talent that was on this. So Ernie Cohen was an old hand at being an artist by the time Ultraman came out. And so he has a very diverse body of work. I don't know if he's known for any one thing in particular. He did the first Amethyst series for DC Comics. What I have of him, he did a adaptation of the original Battlestar Galactica movie / pilot for Marvel Comics. He also did wonderful painted comics with Jim Shooter stories in Magnus Robot Fighter for Valiant. This was issues 13 through 16 of Magnus Robot Fighter with fully painted artwork by Ernie Cohen. Really good stories by Jim Shooter, just great stuff. And just to show you how diverse this guy's work is, he also also drew Rocky and Bullwinkle for Marvel Comics. So that's pretty awesome. Alfredo Alcala, who did the inks, is mainly an inker, I think, but he also does some great illustration. And he drew the very first Masters of the Universe mini comics, which were absolutely gorgeous. And he also has done a lot of work on Marvel Comics Conan back in the 70s and 80s. He is a tremendous, tremendous artist. And what can be said about Dwayne McDuffie that hasn't already been said? He co-created Deathlock for Marvel, and the thing he's best known for, at least I hope he's best known for, is he created Milestone Comics. This was a line of mostly black superheroes in the 90s, and this was amazing. This was honestly, as far as, issue for issue and the amount of time that they lasted so they could develop their plot lines, this was the very best line of comic books to come out of the 90s, and one of the few that actually survived the bust, and deservedly so. These were amazing, amazing comics. He created Hardware, Blood Syndicate, Static, which of course went on to have his own television series, Static Shock, and then Icon. And these were amazing comics, not just because they were well done, with great storytelling, identifiable characters, great action, but they also really just didn't shy away from dealing with real-world issues of racial identity or hate or, Icon. I mean, my God, Icon dealt with racial identity. It dealt with, does Republican ideology belong in the black community? It had 2 issues that dealt with abortion. Can you imagine doing that now? Like, just the presence of a black character would be considered a political agenda by some people. Like, can you imagine actually doing a comic book like this that really tackled real life like that? I mean, I wish Dwayne McDuffie could come back from the dead just so he could do a few more issues of this so I could see some people's heads explode. So Milestone went from 93 to 97. And after that, McDuffie got a couple more chances to do Milestone. He did a 4-issue Static Shock series. I think it was called Rebirth of the Cool or something like that, which was quite good. And then his final Milestone story is a 2-part graphic novel series called Milestone Forever. And this is basically his final statement on the Milestone universe and kind of wraps everything up. And I'm really, really glad he got to do this before he passed away. And if you get Milestone Comics and you have any love for them, this is really, really something you need to pick up, guys. And so, on that solemn note, oh, by the way, and Dwayne McDuffie went on to have a very successful career after Milestone. He would write for a lot of DC's animated stuff. He wrote for Justice League Unlimited. So, he was just a tremendous writer and a tremendous success story to the end of his life. I just wish he was still with us. But anyway, on that solemn note, that's all I got to say about Ultraman, both the Towards the Future TV series and the first miniseries. But Harvey did a follow-up. They did another, I think it's about 4 issues of Ultraman that I will also be reviewing. So like and subscribe for more videos, and next time we'll see if that Ultraman series can live up to this great first adventure. See ya.